What's up, everybody? I am here with MVP Ahmad Najjar, my bro, Flow Bro #1. How's it going, man?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, man. I'm glad to do another video with you. It's been a while.
Same here. Congratulations on your engagement.
Hey, thank you, buddy. Thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
I think that was one of the best adventures of my whole life, man. That Hawaii trip with Alicia getting engaged, that was just outrageous. Like we
That's
did it
that's
all.
awesome. Your proposal is awesome as well. Like you chose a really good spot as well.
Thanks, man. Thank you. Yes. Lucky, and it was good. It was
Yeah,
great. I'm
perfect.
uh I'm I'm savoring that moment. I think I've watched that video like 10 times now. But okay, anyways, let's get into it. What are we talking about today, Ahmad?
So today we're going to be talking about Microsoft Flow and OData. So like, I think last week or 2 weeks ago, I think that somebody was talking about they need to kind of like, clarification around Microsoft Flow and OData and how to use OData with the connectors. So
Yeah.
I think that we kind of like, we hear them. We are here for them to kind of like, support them, support the community and show them how to work with that. So yeah.
So you know where this actually came from. I want to pimp it out right now.
All
There's a
right.
brand new section in the community called blog request board.
All right.
And so this actually was born there. That board went up 2 weeks ago, and the very first blog request that went live was how to work with OData and Flow. And then there was a tweet about it, and you saw that tweet, and you were like,
Exactly.
"Let's do it."
Exactly.
Yeah. So if you want to check out that blog request board, I'll go ahead and make sure that gets linked in the description.
All right, right
All right,
on.
man. Take it away, Ahmad.
Okay, so today we're going to be talking about Microsoft Flow and OData, and I'm looking forward to kind of like, expand my followers on Twitter. So here's my Twitter account, so make sure that you follow me on Twitter and my blog. I don't blog that much, but,
He tweets more
just,
than he blogs.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm just more kind of like, practical guy. I just do videos and do sessions. I just show people how to do the magic. All right. So first of all, for our agenda today, so we're going to be talking about OData. It's going to be kind of like a little bit a long introduction because it's really important to understand the concepts of OData, and that's why we need that introduction. So what is OData and basics and definition and stuff like that. Then we move on to Microsoft Flow, REST, and OData and how it's all this connected and why we are using OData. And then we talk about how to use OData in Microsoft Flow. And then we show some OData operators and functions because if you need to use the OData within the connectors in Microsoft Flow, you definitely need to know the operators and functions so you could be able to send that within the OData. Finally, we going to do simple demos, show you how to work with the OData and the connectors with the Microsoft Flow.
I love it. Sounds good, man.
All right. So start first, a little bit about me. So probably some people does not know me from before. I think that I'm getting more and more popular, but about me is still Jew. So my name is Ahmed Najjar, aka the Flow Jedi, and I'm based in Oslo, in Norway. I'm a senior consultant at InfoWorker, and I'm business applications MVP and passionate, enthusiastic developer heart and soul. I've been working with SharePoint for over 14 years, and I'm mainly when I'm not doing, basically my role is working with SharePoint, PnP, and PowerShell. Most of my days is just spent it with SharePoint. But when I'm not doing that, I'm working with Flow, Power Apps, and Logic Apps. And that's something I really love. It's a passion I have for those products. And I'm also a co-organizer for the SharePoint Saturday in Oslo. All right, so we came to the introduction. So a definition is due here about OData and what is OData. So OData actually, stands for Open Data Protocol, and that's also stands for is an open standard protocol which allows the creation and consumption of queryable, and interoperable RESTful APIs in a simple and standard way. So in simple words, it's kind of like, a way to regulate how to communicate with APIs, sort of, if you want to filter, if you want to get data. So yeah, go on, John.
Well, and an API, so I think there's a couple things we got to break down. Like, what's an
All right.
API, right? An API is how you talk to a piece of software, a service,
All right.
right? An API is the layer that communicates to that service. And so that service, its API defines what things it can do, what actions it can take, what it triggers on, what it listens for, right? So I think that's the first piece. And then what OData does then, from what I've heard Ahmad say, is basically then it creates a set of standards, how you can then simply interact with those commands that the
Exactly.
API has defined.
Exactly. That's correct.
Okay,
That's
cool.
totally correct. Thank you for breaking that down.
Yeah, no problem.
Way better than me. Like I'm just always stuck with the technical, and then we kind of like, try to break down things in the difficult way because we're so technical. But that's
Hey,
good.
that's what I'm here for, man. That's
All
what I
right.
do best.
Okay, so the second thing that we want to know, so Microsoft initiated the OData in 2007. So it's a Microsoft standard that was kind of like, used with
I
all
didn't
the,
know that.
yeah,
Yeah, I didn't know that. That's pretty cool.
yeah. So it was initiated in 2007. And right now you can see that most, or not most, I think that all of the products that Microsoft, launches, whether they're like on-prem or whether they're in the cloud, they are, OData structured. So basically anything that within that product, though, that basically you could just use it as, as a software, as a service in the cloud, like for example, Outlook, it also has its own OData. It also has its own API, in other words. So
Got
that
it.
means that you can interact with that API and then, get data using OData. So that's basically, Microsoft have structured all the products and services within the cloud or on-prem to be able to be RESTful. We say RESTful, so it means that it does have a RESTful API.
Got it.
So the last thing that we want to say here is that this protocol enables the creation and consumption, as we said before, for RESTful API, which allows any web clients to publish and edit resources identified using URLs. So basically, when you call that service or when you want to call that service, it's actually defined by URLs. So for example, if you want to call the Outlook service, there should be a URL that's defined specifically for the Outlook, and then you need to specify which tenant that you're using and so on and so forth, depending on your credentials and all that. But everything is identified using URLs. So in other words, what you see within Microsoft Flow is a connector, but in the background, actually, there's URLs that are being called and there's parameters are being sent in order to be able for you to do that kind of like, command against the API.
And so I
And
think this paragraph here, what it's really trying to say, like the first part is, well, what's a REST API versus a different API? REST is just a type of API. There's a few
right.
different types of APIs. We don't need to get into the specifics of those. I think just know that REST is a type.
All right.
But all of this messaging right here is just trying to say that what this is trying to do is save you development work by creating a simpler system of using URLs and a simpler method of passing information.
Right on.
Right?
No, that's correct. No, that's correct. And the last thing that I want to say is actually using simple HTTP messages. So basically what you're doing is still using web concepts and web concepts that we do understand that there's like, HTTP messages could be sent back and forth with the payload of the requests and responses. So it uses also simple HTTP messages.
Got it.
All right. So for the next one, that explains how it actually works, in kind of like, physical representation, how it actually works. So a client sends a request with a JSON payload. This JSON payload could hold the URL that you're calling for and as well as some filter data that you send, which we call them the OData. You know, the standards that we want to send, we send them as a JSON payload. So we send them as well with a request. And then we need to define what kind of method that we're using, because we're in a web client, so we're still using web standards. So we need to decide or to define which HTTP method that we're actually using. So there's like get, post, put, delete, and for each of these methods, you can perform different commands against the source, and then we'll send actually an HTTP request then is being sent to the service or the API. And then after that, the API actually sends back another HTTP request using the same method that you've actually used, and then with a JSON payload that the client will receive.
Okay, so this whole thing is OData, right? That whole bubble, all that is kind of defining OData entirely.
Yeah. So what's being sent with the what's being actually sent with the payload. So the payload needs to hold some kind of like, you know, definition that the API would understand.
Right. Okay. So then on the left side, client sends a request. That's me. That's the flow. That's something over there that needs something that we've built. And then the JSON in the middle, if for those of you that aren't familiar, JSON is, I would argue it's code because it has syntax, but a developer like a mod would argue that it's a language that describes code. And so all we're doing here is passing some information. And then in the middle, what you see here, get, post, put, delete, this is API language. This is how an API works. They have these simple commands, get, post, put. And then inside of those, there's additional things you can do. Get, this resource, or get this thing, or post means like, or put means give it back, right? So get is bring it to me, put is give it. And so they all define different actions. But the thing to know is that's API language. Now, HTTP, this is just another kind of protocol that passes information. Like JSON is a way to pass information. HTTP is another way to pass information. And so what we're trying to show here is just this is the infrastructure or the architecture of how OData breaks down behind the scenes.
Right. Right on. That's correct. So this is how it works. We move to another subject through the introduction, which is basically what you can do with OData. So when you send that payload with some, kind of like, descriptive language of what you can do against the source or against the API. So there's different stuff that you could do. The first thing that you could do is requesting data. And under requesting data, there's similar stuff that you could do. First is requesting entity collections. Like I could just break it down, for example, like get all rows in a SQL database, or you could just get all items from a SharePoint list. So this is actually requesting entity collections. So you just turn all the entities.
Got it.
Second one is actually requesting an individual entity by ID, and that's something as well, you find it as well within Microsoft Flow. So for example, get item by ID within SharePoint, get item by ID within SQL Server, and there's like, several connectors that defines an ID as an identifier. So you send the ID of something, of an entity, and it actually returns the entity. Or requesting an individual property or individual property row value. So for example, you want to get only name, you want to get only, for example, count, something like that. This is not available per se, and if that's something that you need to kind of like, do within, it's either you create your own API that does that, or probably,
use CDS.
Extract, extract the values within Flow. So that's when you look at it, because all the connectors within Microsoft Flow, Microsoft is trying to make those as generic as possible for you, and to be order to consume them and get as much as possible from them. So they're not going to be like 1,000 connector for SharePoint just because you need to get one item. So they're trying to make them as generic as possible, and then you need to break them down once you kind of like you get the data. And that's why OData is important, because then you could filter and then you could get specific entities as well.
Right. And this is important because a lot of the times if you don't want to if you have a lot of information, you don't want to be filtering through all that information every time. That takes a long time. You want to
Exactly.
return the items you need if you know what those are.
Exactly. And something
Yep.
else that does when you filter the data, it actually, returns a smaller payload within the response that gets back from the service, which makes the flow runs faster. So imagine
Yes.
that you're actually, getting 1,000 record, and then you have to go through all those 1,000 records and then or items, and then you need to filter them rather than sending a filter query, which actually filters on the server side or on the product side or whatever API that you're connecting to, and then return, for example, 2 items or 3 items. So it makes
Right.
things way better for you.
Totally. Got it.
The second thing is actually that you could do with OData is querying data. That's something we're gonna be focusing on today. So for example, what we could do is the option of filter, and that's something is really obvious. I think that most of the RESTful API connectors within Flow uses the filter, and that's something we're gonna see in the demos. Order by, so if you want to order by specific property within that entity, you could do that. You want to get top items, or you want to skip a couple of items and get the bottom ones, you could do that. Count, and that's something available within OData, but I don't think that any connector have that, not unless you develop your own connector and then you return the count. But that's
Gotcha.
also something that you could return the count of items that actually got returned.
Okay.
Expand, if you have entities, and in those entities you have properties of complex types. I'll give an example, just not to make it so complex. So when you return items from a SharePoint list, you return the item itself. But there's also some columns that is called, for example, created by or modified. Those
Yeah.
are type user, and those are actually complex types because they holds email, they holds name, they holds like a lot of stuff about the user, her or himself. So that's a complex type. So if you want to
Okay.
expand those, you could use the expand. But most of the time, the connectors within Microsoft Flow returns the properties, the complex properties expanded, so no need to use that. Select is actually if you want to select specific properties from the entity. So for example, if you want to return ID and name, you don't want to return the whole entity item. So say that you probably have like, a list within 11 columns and you want to return just 5 or 4 columns. So you could do that within the select query. Uh,
So there's
yeah.
actually we have a built-in select action in Flow. We've actually that's one piece of OData that we've actually made. Is that the same thing now? The select action, is that the same thing as because what I can do is like a SharePoint get items, and
Yeah.
then I can do a select, which allows me to just select out, 2 or 3 things that I define and then pass on further in the flow. Is that the same thing?
Yeah, probably. If we're talking about the same thing within the same action, if you set like, for example, select title and select, for example, created by.
Yeah.
So that's only selecting 2 properties of the whole property set of the entity.
Yes. We're saying the same thing. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
And there's like, we have the search system query, which is option that restricts the result to include only those entities matching specific search expressions. So you send a search expression and you say, I want to search for that thing, but that's the search expression needs to be defined as well at the other end on the API. That's
Okay.
something that's kind of like, a bit complex. If you're a developer and have developed an API before, so you'd understand what the search does. But I don't think that there's a search option within the built-in connectors. So you can't do that on specific search criteria that restricts the data. Finally is the lambda operators, which is if you're familiar with LINQ, if you have developed things with LINQ, and if you want to kind of like, do complex
Link, like the thing that was
operation.
Skype, Lync, link.
No. There's also something that's called LINQ, which is LINQ. It's
Ah,
actually
okay.
within development. And there's something that we call lambda operators. So if we want to do like, evaluate Boolean expressions on a collection, they can work either collection properties or collection of entities. So that you kind of like, compare, and then you check whether that actually matches a Boolean expression, then you get all the data that matches those Boolean expression. So you put a big expression, and then you kind of test it against a collection of entities or an entity, and then you return that item. So for example, a request that returns people with email containing at Microsoft.com. So it will return all the people that does have, you don't have to test the property itself, rather than you test the collection. So you send the lambda expression, and the lambda expression will do that on the REST API end, and will check if it actually contains at Microsoft.com, and then returns all those items. Instead of you have to go through all the items, check the emails of the users, and then, oh, okay, those are Microsoft, those are not Microsoft.
Okay, cool.
So that's something that you can do, but there's also no lambda operators as I know of in the built-in connectors.
Okay.
So the last thing is actually data modification. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but like things that you could do is create an entity, delete, and update, and those are actually standard, things that we use every day within Flow. So for example, when you create an item within SharePoint, create an item in SQL Server, or you delete, or you update. So basically, you're using those expressions in order to create, delete, update, and do that as well. I'm going to be talking about the rest because that's just probably is going to be irrelevant to what we're doing here. So we'll just do that. All right.
All right, let's get it.
So the next thing we're going to be talking about, what is the relation between Microsoft Flow, REST, and OData? So you heard me, giving examples about the connectors and trying to kind of like, give you a crystallized idea and connect the dots and make you understand that Microsoft Flow connectors are actually REST APIs. But they're like, defined in a better way for you, and an easy way, not in a developer way, but an easy way so you could consume them within Microsoft Flow. So when you kind of like, create item within a SharePoint list, you're actually calling a REST API to do that for you. But Microsoft just make the things just more visual to you and add, the whole kind of like, logic into it in order for you to make a kind of like a workflow. And things, got prettier. But all
Thank goodness
that you see within Microsoft Flow, all the connectors that you see within Microsoft Flow are actually REST APIs, one way or the other. They are what they are. And in turn, they should be using OData protocols. So basically that follows, and why OData is important, why people are asking about OData, because they also follow the OData protocol as well, because they're REST APIs. They are APIs. All right, so how to use OData in Microsoft Flow. So there's like, two types of connectors that you could have within Microsoft Flow. The first type is actually the built-in connectors. The built-in connectors comes with a certain types of fields that you could pass in some OData stuff with. So for example, as you see to the left-hand side, we have get items in SharePoint, and there's something that's called filter query. And in the description, it says an OData filter query to restrict the entries returned. So basically, you could just pass in an expression so you could filter the data that gets returned from SharePoint. You could also, if you want to order items that gets returned from SharePoint by title, by ID, by whatever property that exists within this list, you could do that. You want to get the top count. For example, you want to get the top 5 items, the top 2 items, the top 10 items, you could do that as well. So those are actually marked with yellow. Those are actually OData concepts. In the background, they're actually sending OData queries to the API in order to filter the data within an OData way. The same thing as well applies to kind of like the connector within SQL. So as you can see, the aggregation transformation, that's something that you could do against the table if you want to do some transformation while we return the data. I've never used it myself personally, but that's something that you could send a sequence of OData aggregation transformation and transform how the data is actually returned from that table. Filter query, of course, it's the same as within the SharePoint. And order by, if you want to skip count, for example, skip the first 5, skip the first 10, and then take the rest. If you want to get the top ones and skip the rest as well, you could do that. And there's also a select query, which is basically if you want to get a specific items, for example, if you want to get the title, name, or ID, you could do that as well. It only returns the name, for example, or only returns the ID. And that something returns us to something that we've saw earlier. So if I could use the laser pen here, people should see. So you can see a filter. It actually matches the filter query in here. So you pass in an expression here, which is an OData expression. Order by here, you don't actually pass an, oh, you do pass an expression here, which is an order by query specifying the order of the entries in how you order them. But for example, skip is actually this. The only thing that you pass in here is just the number, but in the background, it actually sends an OData filter that skips, for example, the first 2 or the first 5. The same thing as well with top. Top here is actually top count. It does that. You pass in a number, but actually what it does is actually send an operator to through OData, and then that will translate into get the top count of for example, the first 5 items, the first 4 items, and so on and so forth. Select query is actually the same.
The SQL one here seems to have more options like built into the connector. The SharePoint one, can it do top and skip and like select query?
It does top, but it does not do skip.
So like, can you build a custom filter query to do a skip?
Definitely you can. Definitely you can.
Okay.
But those are actually the built-in connectors. They don't have that one. But
gotcha.
But if you built your own connector, which is actually the next thing that we're going to be talking about, which is the custom connectors, then you build whatever you want to pass in within that connector. This is a connector that I've built before, and it's actually works against Yelp, and it's a known service. They have their own API, and I'm
Yelp is
passing
cool.
here items. So instead of passing term and location and latitude and longitude, I've actually split it all those properties that you can send them to the APIs, and then I could just specify those specifically within a field. So if we go back here, as you can see here, skip and top count, they could be also OData that you can pass in within the URL that you're calling for the API. But instead, Microsoft made it just easier for you, and that's why you just need to pass in, for example, you just pass in a number, so that's possible.
Okay.
But as you can see here, I did kind of like the same within the custom connector. I just pass in the term or pass in the location instead of passing the whole OData query to the API. So instead of writing code, I'm just filling in understandable data. So for example, the term is sushi. I'm just searching for sushi. Location is Oslo.
Yep.
And then longitude and latitude. Instead of sending that within kind of like an OData way, and then send it to the API, it makes it just difficult for people to understand how the connector works.
Gotcha.
And I could even add more, options to that and add, OData queries as well. But I haven't done that for the custom query. But you can add your own if you're creating your own custom query. You could just pass in that because all RESTful APIs works the same. They follow the same standards, which is OData.
Cool.
So final thing before moving to the demos, there's like a couple of operators that are supported within OData expression language. So for example, we have a couple of logical operators, like for example, equal, not equal, greater than or equal, less than, and so on and so forth, as you can see them here.
Yep.
And there's also some arithmetic operations like addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, and the modulus. So you could do that as well, and as well grouping operators. The second thing is actually functions supported in OData, which is, for example, string functions. You could get substrings, replace, for example, date functions. You could extract the day or the hour or the minute or the month from a date time property.
Nice.
Or you can do some math functions, for example, like double, decimal, et cetera, et cetera. All the data that I've actually presented right now are available within www.odata.org. So you could just find all the information that you want to learn about OData within that site. And I've actually taken that snapshot from there because I won't be bothered to kind of like, fill in that within the slide here. So that's that.
Cool.
So we move to the demos right now.
Demo time.
Demo time. All right. So, okay. So for the first demo, we're going to do something against SharePoint. So I'm going to edit that workflow. I'm going to show you how it looks like. So I'm just triggering this flow manually. And here I'm just, I've created an events array. So after I finished, collecting the data, I want to show you that within the compose action instead of just sending an email or, adding data to SharePoint or whatever. I just want to show you the results within flow. So I've created an array, and then here, I want to get the events for the next 14 days. So I'm actually using a calendar, this is actually my real calendar that I share with my wife, and where are the events that I'm going to and all that stuff. And as you can see, in the next 14 days, I'll be at the European Collaboration Summit along with John as well, and at the SharePoint Saturday in London as well, along with John as well. So those are actually, events that I'm going to. So I want to get the next 14 days. So the first thing I do is actually to get the start date of the event. So I want to have a filter. So I want to have a start date and then an end date, and where it actually, those events ends, or which is the filter, which is I'm going to be passing to the filter query. So first of all, the start date, when does the event starts? And then the end date, which is actually going to be the next 14 days. So I need to show you the expression. So here I just get the start of day and I get UTC. So it gets the start of day, because when I get the UTC only, you actually get the time for now. But I want to get the start of day for today. And then the next thing is actually I do start of day, and then I add 14 days because I want to get the events for the next 14 days. And then I get UTC now, and I add to that 14 days. The next thing I do is actually, this is a list that I have, which is that one in here. And then I just chose the events list. But I want to get those specific events, as I told you before. So this is where the OData magic starts. So I just pass in within the filter query, I want the event date greater than, depending on the operators that we showed you before, greater than. And I pass in here, I say date time. Because this is a string value that I passed in, and I have to convert that into a date time, so the OData understand that it's actually dealing with a date time property, and that's why I put here date time. And as you can see here, I put single quotes, and inside the single quotes I put the variable that I passed in, and then add the event date is less than the 14 days period. So I have a period which starts today and ends after 14 days. And then I have to check if the event date is greater than the date that actually today, but still less than the date that comes after 14 days.
Perfect.
All right.
Yep.
Then I just go through all the items. I just append the items into the array, and I show you the array. So I'll just run the flow here. All right, so it ran successfully. And as you can see, I'm going to 2 events within the next 14 days. But I can do something else. So, for example, say that I want to get, for example, the first one, the first event. So I'm just going to put 1 here, which is the top count, and then test it again. I should get 1 event. In here, I just get 1 event.
Nice.
Which is the European Collaboration Summit.
Nice.
Something else that I could do as well. So here, if I want to, for example, order by. So for example, if I order it by ID, so definitely it's going to be, so what I could order it by is, let's see, I could just order by event date. And I could just say, I think, descending. Like that. I hope that just passed in the correct expression.
I like
No,
this.
I didn't. I'm just trying to remember how I pass in that within. So it should be event date or all right, so I'll just try to do that and just order it by the event date. It should work. It worked actually. So it's supposed to get the items in the same order, but as you can see, that should be like, you know, if it's descending, I remember how to pass in the operator in here. I think it should be descending, it should be DSC, if I remember correctly. Anyways. So that's something that you could do with OData. So that's one example of doing OData.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be complex like the filter query I've actually passed in here. It could be, you know, easier than that. So what we could do is actually go to another example or another demo, which is getting items from SQL. For those who've actually seen my video with John, we talked about the SQL connector. So we're doing this against the same database, which is salary slips.
Nice.
And the salary strips, we're just getting all the rows in here. And what we're trying to do is here, we're doing some filter stuff. So for example, I want to get the items where the ID equals to 1. And I don't need the order because it's not relevant because it should get 1 item. And I'll just save that and test it. And I should get 1 item. I run the flow, ran successfully. And as you can see here, the item with ID 1 has been returned, which is a Stormtrooper 1 with all the items from the database. So what we can do here is if we want to get the items that, if the ID is greater than, for example, 2. So it needs to skip 2 items, or at least 2 items, and get the rest of the items from the database. And ever since, because this is greater than 2, then we probably could order that by ID, for example. And then I could just test that. And as you can see here, we get 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, 11. And of course, it's ordered by ID. So I get all the items that are actually greater, the ID is greater than 2.
And so then could we order it by like employee name instead of ID?
Of course, we can do that. So if we go, just let me see how it's actually, how it's actually written, because we have to specifically pass in how the property is written. So I'll just copy that and then edit. And what I could do is I could order it by the employee name.
Okay.
And then I could test that. And then it should be ordered by the employee name. It's still loading. Come on.
Oh, there
All right.
it is.
So you see here it starts by 5, 9. So here it's actually Darth Vader, another Darth Vader, another Darth Vader, Stormtrooper, Stormtrooper 3, Stormtrooper 3, Stormtrooper 8, Stormtrooper 1, and so on and so forth.
Cool.
All right. So something else that we kind of like, we'd be able to do that if we want to only return the employee names, for example. Let's say employee name and ID. All right. And I just don't want to filter anything in here, but I only want to get, let's say that we skip the first 5 items. And I'll just test that. Notice now that we should only get the ID and the employee name, and it's actually already skipped 5 items and got the rest of the items here.
Nice. This is cool.
Yeah. So that's really easy steps that actually, could just split the difference between, doing the whole, filtration within Flow and just doing the filtration and just, set all the weight on the API itself, because it's actually easier. Processing the whole filtration on the API is just so easier. So you should be using OData more often than you know.
Yeah.
So I think that those actually, covers most of the stuff that we kind of like, we're doing.
Yep.
And those
And
actually,
so,
those are the demos that we have for now. And
cool.
just should get back again to our slides.
So, and now you're using SQL there, but I mean, the same thing is possible. Those filter queries you could do in SharePoint as well.
Of course,
It's just the
definitely.
top count is there, but the skip count is not, and the
Yeah,
order by is
exactly.
not. So as long as you know that syntax that you showed some of that earlier, then you can do all those same things in the SharePoint connector as well.
Totally correct. Yeah, so basically we've just, shown 2 connectors, but any connector, all the connectors are based on REST APIs. So definitely
Yep.
they need to have some sort of like, query. But at least the ones that I know that does not have, filter query, I think that the Twitter does not have. But that's actually probably could be a limitation by the API itself. It does not provide
Yeah.
a way that you could pass in OData, or probably
Yeah.
something that have not been implemented for the connector itself. So it's
So
either
their API is very restrictive.
yeah.
They limit us very highly on what we can do. So that's I would imagine it's probably due to a restriction to in their API.
Yeah, definitely. But I'm just saying that's kind of like a general rule of thumb. So everybody would
Yeah, yeah,
understand why there's some connectors does have OData, but some of them does not have. Like for example, Teams does not have that much, luxury of using the OData, but SharePoint does.
gotcha.
So yeah, so basically, depending on the connectors that you use, now you understand how to use OData because it's actually a concept and you could use it across all the connectors that we have in Microsoft Flow. And that's a wrap for me. Thank you very
Right
much.
on. All right, man, Ahmad, thank you. This was awesome. I'm gonna go and check out odata.org. Is that what you said?
Yeah, that's
Odata.org.
correct.
All right,
Yeah.
I'm gonna go check out odata.org because I feel like I could use this a lot because I do a lot of SharePoint-based flows. I use it as my main database. So yeah, all right, guys, go ahead and follow Ahmad. His Twitter is right there on the screen. He needs some more followers. He tweets a lot. His blog link is there. He doesn't use it that much, so follow the Twitter instead. And you saw he's going to be at Wiesbaden at the European Collaboration Summit. He'll be at SharePoint Saturday London. Make sure to go ahead and get signed up and attend one of his talks. He's always very entertaining and energetic and excited. And Ahmad, thanks for coming and teaching us yet again. Always a pleasure to do a video with you, bro.
Anytime. Pleasure all mine.
All right, what should they do?
Okay, just go follow me. First
Yep.
thing, follow me,
Follow him.
and
Yep.
then go to www.odata.org. Just keep flowing.
All right. Go ahead and like and subscribe to the channel. And much love from me and Ahmad. We'll see you guys in the next video.